Byron, I want to say congratulations. It's a fantastic effort.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Very worthy of the Best in Show. So now, me and Byron are really going to dive into this effort and see why it won Best in Show and see what you can learn to make your own efforts more relevant. So first of all, Byron, I wanted to ask you about the team behind this effort.
Sure, yeah. Well, we know that all great marketing programs begin with great people, right? And I'm fortunate here to represent a good group of IHS marketers. Specifically, I have two colleagues, Penny Carroll and Jim Scanlon, that are in the audience today. And I think this program represents a collection of a lot of people coming together and willing to do things a little differently.
Yeah, I understand the team back at IHS, we're actually live streaming this around the globe right now, and the team back at IHS is watching too, right?
Oh, yeah, I do understand that myself, and to all those folks, thank you very much for all the work you've done, all the work and all the work they will do together.
So to help you understand this case study, let's talk for a second about IHS. And the really interesting thing about lead gen marketers, B2B marketers, there's some big, huge brands that you might not have heard of if you're not in that industry. And so since we've been working for about a month on this with Byron's team, and since then I've read the Wall Street Journal, read an article about oil and gas, and I see IHS quoted. Never noticed them before. See an article about the car industry, I see IHS quoted. So IHS seems everywhere, and I've never noticed it before.
That's right, yeah. So it is a large company, about $2 billion, that most people are not that familiar with. But IHS is really a global information, analytics, and insight company. And we do that with over 2,600 people, experts in industries working in 140 offices around the world that put their heart and soul to studying industries, all the major industries that industry cares about.
And for this specific case study, we're going to talk about IHS Jane's Defense, which I understand is like the marketing Sherpa of the defense industry, basically.
That's right, yeah. IHS Jane's, if you're from the military or have military ties and your friends and family, then you probably know IHS Jane's. It's a 100-year-old brand. And the reason people choose IHS Jane's is there's a couple key parts to it. If you are, say, if you're in military strategy and your neighboring country just got a shipment of brand new fighter aircraft like the one that's on the screen there, you might be interested in understanding, is that fighter better than the ones we currently have? Does this represent a threat? So that's one reason why people turn to IHS Jane's. Another reason is, let's say you work for a company that builds tanks. And you're saying, gosh, our tank production, we're not selling that many of them. What is the state of the world of tanks? How many of them are about to be obsoleted? And so what can we expect this market to do into the future? So whether you're in industry or in the military, IHS Jane's has products that help you make critical decisions.
Sounds like a lot of value, but probably a communication challenge to get that across. So let's talk about the before, and this is, again, really why we chose this as a Best in Show case study. We think a lot of marketers are facing this similar challenge. You had a real batch and blast approach. You want to get into that?
Sure, yeah. So the great thing about IHS Jane's is we had a ton of traffic. We would get hundreds of thousands of people to the website per month, but few of these people would engage past just hitting the top level and bouncing off. And we really needed a way to turn all that traffic into more qualified leads and to continue that conversation with people after they engaged.
So now when you hear what Byron and his team did, you're going to hear a lot of buzzwords, right? A lot of great buzzwords like automation, marketing automation, personas, segmentation, nurturing. But what have those buzzwords really meant to your company? What have they meant to your team?
Well, I mean, we can see it on the slide. I mean, after we're going to go through some of the specifics that we did, but in the end, we were pleased to turn on a program that gave us some truly actionable personas. We were able to have a better alignment with sales, and in the end, delivering better quality leads that are turning into revenue for the sales team. And ultimately, that's the measure of a successful marketing program.
So let's look at that success. We're going to use the Stephen Covey principle to begin with the end in mind and give away the ending, look at the results.
Exactly.
Some amazing increases in click-through rate, over 1,000% on one of the touches, but even more impressive, higher quality leads.
Exactly, yeah. And so we can see that the click-through rate was fantastic and certainly exceeded our expectation in terms of how well we were engaging with its audience. But was really the home run, you know, and ultimately the measure of a marketing program is how much revenue it's contributing. And if we look at how much net new business marketing was generating for the business in the first half of the year, and then we turned on this IHS Jane's Insider program that we're happy to talk about today and look at the contribution we're making to IHS Jane's net new revenue in the second half of the year, we're pleased to say we've almost doubled that number, and that is really exciting.
Now that you understand why you should listen to Byron, obviously a very successful case study, let's talk about what you can learn from this. So the challenge we faced when we put this together, we only have 30 minutes today. We wanted to figure out what can we best teach you in 30 minutes that you can learn for your own company, which is probably different or maybe similar to IHS that you can take back. And we can't really give this case study justice in 30 minutes. It would take 3 hours. But we can talk about 3 major challenges his team had to overcome to move from batch and blast to automated, persona-based marketing, and lessons they've learned that you can use as well. And that begins with keeping the rocket fueled. Do you want to talk about what you mean by that, Byron?
Sure. What we were talking about here is just recapping the challenges we had. We had great traffic, but we weren't converting it. We had great brand recognition, but we couldn't necessarily get them all the way to close won revenue. And so we decided we needed to step back and take a look at this, and we realized the types of conversations that we needed to have, we probably weren't going to be able to construct manually. And so it quickly led us into a discussion about automation.
Yeah, I mean, why automation? So the tough thing about these case studies is we know the end, right? We know you used automation, it worked, but when you were actually going through, I mean, you faced a challenge. I'm sure you had many different possibilities. Why did you choose automation to?
Well, automation, there's a few reasons why we probably want to get into it, but most specifically there is that we did not have enough resources to execute everything we wanted to do in a manual way. I mean, automation really was the answer for us. We wanted to try to send the right content at the right time to the right person. And if you have an army of people, pun intended, then you could probably do that. You could probably keep up with that for a while. But most people don't have those types of resources. So it was really about let's monitor behavior and let's send the right content at the right time. And it sure started to pay off.
So not only did we ask Byron, okay, what marketers should use automation, as you said, we also asked what marketers should not use automation, and this kind of brought out the comedian in you.
Yeah, exactly. So a little tongue-in-cheek on the slide there. But the net result is that batch and blast approaches are great if you're happy with your results there. But if you're not happy with the results, and I think most marketers strive to do better, you're going to struggle to get different results if you keep doing the same batch and blast type campaigns. And so also, if you have budget and people, you could probably overcome this problem for the short time, but you're not going to be able to solve it for the long time. And finally, if you're a person that believes the internet is a fad, then probably, that's not something that marketing automation is your primary objective right now.
So let's get into that next challenge. So getting the right content to the right people. So let's focus on the people first. So here's how you did it. Here's how other marketers can do it. You started with a persona. You started with getting the right people in the room together to define some primary personas. So talk to me about how did you decide who to get in that room and some of the decisions you made to understand who your customer was?
Well, sure. I mean, it starts with kind of some obvious. We need to get the right marketing folks and the right product management folks together. And we knew we needed the sales and the voice of the customer as well. But it's sometimes more difficult to get sales in the room, right? They have quotas, they have responsibilities. And so what we did initially is we got the marketing and product management folks in the room, and we said, what types of people are buying our products? And we supplemented that with data and looking at, well, what types of titles are we actually seeing in terms of net new deals? What type of a person in these companies is buying? So with the intuition of the marketing and product management folks and the titles that we're actually seeing coming through on the CRM system, we came up with this theory. We came up with these 6 kind of groups of personas that we thought would likely be the ones that we wanted to target. And what we did is on the next slide there, we took that to the sales team. Now, fortunately, the sales team did not say you missed one. Rambo is a key priority. So that was good that they didn't think we needed to target that individual. But specifically, if you look at the green areas of that slide, those were the 6 that we said, gosh, these are the ones that we really think can make a difference for us going forward. But the interesting feedback from the sales team was, hey, we generally agree with the 6, but we think you're missing something. We think there's some granularity within each of those 6 that you need to be paying attention to. And so this led us to this discussion of we probably need 6 primary personas, and then where appropriate, we need some other personas underneath that to explain, because the goal here is to drive to a unique way they buy, a unique challenge they have, and a unique way the IHS Janes product line can solve that. And so we didn't need to try to get people into these buckets.
Yeah, it's excellent. I want to challenge one thing you said, because when you talked about sales, you called them the voice of the customer.
Well, I was talking about 2 separate pieces.
Okay. Because
so sales and research to get voice of the customer.
Okay, excellent. Because it sounds like what you did here with marketing is you're helping become the voice of the customer team, and you're really respecting the email address you're getting and trying to send the most relevant information to those people.
Well, that's exactly right. I think you can get some of that voice of the customer unbiased if you look in your CRM system. If you see the names of the people that responded that turned into business, that is a very, very clear voice of the customer right there as well.
And then so you define those secondary personas as we talked about. And so once you have those buyer personas, then that helped shape your segmentation model.
That's right, that's right. And so this led us to the discussion of, okay, so the blessing and the curse, we now know we have to support these 6, but now what are we going to do about it? And that led us into the discussion about, well, now that we know, how are we going to talk to these 6 people differently, or these 6 groups of people differently?
So how many here have clear buyer personas for their email campaigns?
A decent amount.
Okay. All right, so you figured out the right people. Now you got to get the right content to them. So first, and I think in talking to you, this is going to make all the other marketers feel better who have a challenge in trying to get that right content. You are a content company. Like we talk about IHS Janes, you publish content, and yet you struggled in getting that content.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it was when I was fortunate to join IHS 2.5 years ago now, I said, oh, this is, and marketing at IHS, this is going to be fantastic. We are a content company. I will never seek, lack for content again. And guess what? It's the same challenge every company has. There's the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? There's everything, and it's all geared towards making customers and making our customers more successful. But what we'll see as we go through this, we have a lot of content that if you say, boy, I know who Janes is, and I think I want to understand that report. We have a lot of content. We can start free trials and demos and samples and all this stuff. But if you're earlier in the buying process and you're not sure whether you want Janes or not, or you're not sure why Janes is better than company ABC, we didn't have a lot of that early buying stage content. And so that was something we had to identify.
Well, let's be frank, another bigger challenge you produced for yourself by going from batch and blast to targeting these specific personas, you needed more content, right? Because you had to have content for each persona.
Absolutely, yeah. So we exacerbated the problem certainly by choosing to market in 6 different ways.
Made it harder for yourself. So then, and this was another really interesting tip you gave. You said content takes much longer to build than technology for a multi-touch lead nurturing program. So I think sometimes marketers really challenge, oh, there's technology involved, but really the content is where you got to focus.
Well, that's exactly right. I think, and I'd love, we're doing a roundtable on this later today, so I'd love to get the feedback in the group about this. But my perspective after going through this several times is that it's not the technology. Now, you need to have some marketing automation platform to do, I think, some of the things we're talking about here. But having that alone is not necessarily the barrier. You know, don't mistake having a marketing automation platform for having a process, because they're 2 different things. We all have CRM systems that we've installed, and we stood back and say, well, how come revenue's not bigger? How come sales cycle's not bigger? How come, my cycle time's not faster? And the reality is, it is what you make of it. A CRM system is just a box. And if you choose to fill it with your old processes, you're going to get the old results. And if you choose to fill it with new processes that are optimized for the buying behaviors, then you can expect to get different results. But it's really important to understand. But all that said, though, Daniel, all that said, we did find out that we could probably build a marketing automation system faster than we could go fill gaps in content. And so it became a priority to go find that content soon, because we knew from the time you give me all the content to the time my team could turn on a program is a couple weeks maybe. But if you're missing content from the beginning, you can't even start that process.
And I think that's a really key takeaway for everyone too. I mean, make sure you have that content lined up. Like you said, you can't just build this machine. You have to have something that you're putting through that machine to make it all work.
That's right, yep.
So this is Email Summit. Let's take a look at what some of these emails looked like. Can you tell us what we're looking at here? This is day 8 in the multi-touch
Sure, yeah, so we're going to go through a bigger campaign flow a little later, but specifically what you're looking at here is those 3 screenshots on the left there are the exact same. Only a person would only get one of those 3. But if we don't necessarily know who you are, or you said you're kind of a general persona, you get the top one. If you've told us that, hey, I'm specifically interested in this type of persona, then we customize that text in the yellow to start talking to you in a different way. And if, for example, you came in from another campaign, right? Like all of us, we're not running one campaign at a time. Most of us have multiple campaigns going on. And guess what? Some of the things we're promoting over here might be relevant to this audience too. So we needed a way that if we're, for example, saying, hey, IHS on a macro level can help you manage risk, and you didn't kind of complete that process, you never quite got to sales on the risk track, we wanted a place to tip you into. If you said that you were a defense company, we wanted a place to tip you into this program too, so we could talk about, hey, we're putting you in this program because this program is another way to help you understand and manage risk. So it was about tying not only who they said they were, but where they came from into dynamic content.
And helping them understand why they're getting that email.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and if you can zoom in, if you read on the screen, it says, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk to you about how we can help you. And the feedback we got is customers and prospects really like that. They like the fact of they know what's next. 4 weeks, you're going to be talking to me more than you normally do. And it's because I did this. I filled out a form, I entered a program, and so that was, I think, an important step that if we're just honest with people from the beginning about what's going on, they're not surprised when we're back every week.
It sounds like you're talking to them in a very human voice as
Exactly.
well. And then you also had to create content around the value proposition for becoming a customer. So it sounds like previously there's a lot of assumed value that people should know why they should become a customer of Jane's Defense, but you really zoomed in on that value proposition.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, obviously that's where the rubber meets the road there on the value proposition where they're making a financial decision to move forward. But as we mentioned before, we had a lot of stuff that was, hey, here's the demo, here's the free trial, here's the sample report, but we did need to do some creation in terms of some stuff upstream.
Yeah, and so, for example, I think you gave a report to show them what they'll actually be getting, right?
Exactly, and this was one of these controversial decisions that many of you guys face, is that the folks in the company says, you can't give that away, that costs thousands of dollars. If we give it away, we won't be able to sell it. And the reality is, well, they're probably not going to move forward unless you tell them what they're missing. And so what we found is that as we expose people to the quality of information we offer, that was the biggest testimonial we could say. Well, here is actually what you're going to be getting if you become a customer, and that resonated very well.
And that's another challenge many marketers face with content marketing, is they don't want to give away too much for free. But keep in mind, you're giving that away. You weren't giving it for nothing, right? You're giving it for more interest in the company.
That's right, exactly. And this only happens on 3 weeks into the program. We do not, 15 minutes after you fill out the first form, offer you this. This is 3 weeks into your journey that we're starting to offer you some assets that are very important to us.
And then lastly, continue that conversation, right? So you had this multi-touch nurturing program set up, but it didn't end there when that was over, right?
Exactly. We think even the most successful program is not going to engage 100% of the people, right? Some people just go away. They get their needs met, the challenge goes away. Not everybody's going to complete your sales cycle, in the way that you want in terms of close one business or leads to sales, but we didn't want to just let those people go. And so we found there's a way that we could even repackage some of our content we would find something that's relevant to you, and every month send it to you. And the concept behind the 2 emails on the screen here is everybody that meets that persona gets the email on the left there. But only those people who actually view the report get the email on the right. So we weren't really peppering the entire database to start this live demo when they're not really interested, right? We're only talking to the people that actually saw interest in the report, read the report, then they get the follow-up email a few days later to start the live demo, and we saw great conversion between those 2 steps.
Yeah, and if you can't see the call to action he's talking about, it is get a live demo after they read the paper, and that, as we talked about, the higher quality leads that sales is getting, that must be one of those reasons why, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, there's nothing ambiguous about that call to action. Yeah. I mean, the customer is not, I wonder what happens next, right? I mean, if you click that button,
raising their hand,
they're going to be contacted by a salesperson, and those are the people that sales wants to talk to. So yeah, it very much drove the higher quality of leads.
Okay, now let's talk about another challenge some of you may face. When we think about automation, we think of technology, and that's obviously a big piece of it. But there's also, as you were saying, the culture behind it. It's just a box. So let's get into how you helped shape that culture. So first of all, you had to set up these automated drip campaigns, which we're going to look at in a second. But a really key point your team made was, just because you were doing these automated nurture tracks doesn't mean you stopped batch and blast. You just started doing batch and blast smarter because you knew more about the customer.
Exactly, and we're going to talk about how we started gathering more information on prospects than we ever could. So even though some of our methods were still batch, they were much more targeted, because we understood who we were talking to and what type of a role they had in the organization, and in many levels, now their secondary persona. And so this batch, instead of being, here's 10,000 people, gosh, I hope it's interesting to somebody, now this batch is 200 people or 500 people that we know fit this profile. And so obviously, the tighter your batch, the more controlled, the more homogeneous those batches are, partnered with a relevant message, of course, you're going to get higher open and click-through rates.
Yeah, so it's clearly not just about the technology, it's about really learning about the customer.
Yeah.
And the technology can sometimes help with that, as it does here. Can you just briefly go over how your nurturing tracks work?
Absolutely. So we start with the red box there at the top, a welcome email. So within 15 minutes of you hitting the database, you get a welcome email, which basically says, hey, stay in touch with us with some social media links. And then after that, we start this journey of 4 touches, 1 per week, in which we take you through the process of kind of introducing us, and then kind of introducing some case studies, and ultimately asking them to take part of a demo. And what we see is a lot of people took great advantage of that purple area, but not everybody did. We saw a lot of people still, 4 weeks later, never really engaged again. So week 5 and 6 and each month thereafter, we would start to talk to them about a more macro topic to try to see who's still interested. And it was the week 5 and 6 in the monthly program that I think makes this interesting, because we don't give up on somebody. That there's always an opportunity to keep the engagement going.
And you just keep providing more value to them,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Because it's not selling, it's not, hey, get this demo. It's, hey, here's a report about something that just happened in China, or this satellite imagery. These are relevant breaking news topics that are interesting, that somebody in that industry would probably be curious about. And now we use that opportunity, if you're interested in that, to give you an opportunity to see a demo and see this stuff in real time.
So now, if you are interested in forms, I mean, Byron's team is amazing with forms. You're going to get some great tips here. So obviously, when you created this persona information, as we talked about with that meeting, you actually had to find a way to change the culture in the way you do forms and capture that information. So let's look at one of these forms, how you captured the information to fuel those personas.
Yeah, early in the process, we said, we really don't know how to talk to you unless you tell us what persona it was. And that led us to the conversation of how in the world are we going to know what persona it is? You can't go buy a list of everybody who's a strategic planner, right? Not an accurate one anyway. And so we made the tough decision that we're just going to ask you. Every single thing that you ask for on IHS.com that's related to Jane's Defense, we're going to ask you. Tell us which of these 6 personas you are. And that was a controversial decision, because that adds a field, that adds friction, and then it was like, what are you going to do with it once you get it? Fortunately, we had something to do with it once we knew it.
Yeah, and speaking of adding friction, I think people are worried about their forms making them too long, so they don't add more friction, but they need to get information as sales. And you have a lot of really interesting ways to reduce that friction, but still to get a lot of information from the customer. I think you call this the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's kind of the iceberg form. So there's a few companies that do this, and we partnered with one of them very successfully. Is what we do is we use a combination of your IP address when you hit that form and the domain that you set in your email to guess what company we think you're with. And when you get to that company name on our form, we present you a list of options, like, for example, Lockheed Martin in this case. And so once the person clicks Lockheed Martin, to them it looks like, I can't quite read it from here, 6, 7 fields, right? It's a pretty low friction form, I think we'd all agree. But what's actually happening behind the scenes is we write about 20 other fields to the database as soon as they pick Lockheed Martin. We write a structured company name, so it's always the same way every time. We write full address, phone number. We write annual sales, industry, employee size. You can imagine how, as a marketer, this becomes incredibly powerful. Not only do I know what persona the person is in, I have fully structured data about what company they work for. And this allows us to get extremely creative with our next touch, or even our batch and blast message if we want to.
With a small ask on the part of the customer.
Absolutely, yeah. I think most people see that and they say, oh, that's weird. I wonder how they knew that. But what do? You click it and you move on, right? Behind the scenes, we capture all this information, and it's made a significant difference.
That's excellent. And so then, obviously, the way this actually worked, we'll just show you briefly, is the emails had, as we showed before, those were customizable templates where you can just change in for the different personas the content you are using.
Exactly, yeah. What's clever about the structure that we set up here is the yellow boxes are all dynamic. That is one email that the system decides to either add or not add that yellow text, depending on their source and who they said their persona was.
And that, as you mentioned earlier, really helps with the human resource constraint and not having enough people.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to manage, let's say you didn't like that email and you wanted to change it. You'd have to change it 6 places, right, if they were individual. Otherwise, in the database, you change it once.
Yeah. And so This is another great form lesson for everybody. So again, we want to put those long forms. The great thing about a multi-touch strategy and continuing to communicate and deliver value is you don't have to ask everything at once. So you use progressive profiling very well. We see there before and after you started with progressive profiling, how much shorter your opt-in is right now, right?
Yeah, exactly. We made, I think on the next slide, we say we went from 15 down to 7. And so if you want to get a sense, well, how did that help you? Over 50% improvement in form conversion rate on these forms.
Another quick lesson you mentioned. So you said when you changed how you asked for email address in the form, you got better email addresses.
Yes. Yeah, what we saw before is originally this form had said just email address. And what we were getting was email addresses, Yahoo, Live, Gmail, right? And so we said, well, we can't stop you from entering those. So let's just call it the business email address, right? All we did was change the label. And although we still get some, I'm not saying we stopped it entirely, the percentage of people that actually gave us their business email went up. So here's a simple change that I'd offer to everybody. Call it business email right on your form, and you might start getting more business emails if that's what you're interested in collecting.
So the way the progressive profiling worked is all that content you were sending out was gated, so people would have to hit forms and fill out more information. So can you give us an example of some of the additional asks you had? So here's more persona information.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that was clever about how we started the program was that if we know everything about you, the form that you would get to, and we never put a form in front of you until week 3. You entered the database in most cases because you filled out a form, and that was all the information we needed for the first couple weeks. But starting on week 3, we started putting assets in front of you that were more important to us. And so if you would come to this form 3 weeks in or so, everything on this form will be filled out except for the right-hand bottom side where it says, tell us about this secondary persona. We thought asking for your primary and your secondary persona on the first date, we thought that was a little much. But we thought asking for your secondary persona 3 weeks in, that was appropriate. And when in most cases the entire form is filled in, except for that one field, people 50% of the time were giving it to us.
Yeah, as Flint was talking about this morning, I mean, that email is a continuing conversation with people, so you have to grab everything at once. Here's another example where you're using autofill for the info you already knew, and in this time you were asking for address, I think?
Exactly. Now, in most cases, we may know that. In some cases, it may want to be our IP triggered that populated that field. But when you get to this form, it probably means when you click that button, you're about to go to the salesperson. You're going to become a lead. And so it's important that we have good contact information from you at that point, but only at that point. We don't need your address on day 1, but we need your address in order to get you to the right salesperson.
Absolutely. And the last lesson is test, 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 right? So you were really clear about you've got to get this out the door. You wanted to get things moving. You didn't want to wait too much, but you didn't just stop there. Now you're continually trying to test and optimize and improve.
Absolutely. And we said there's a couple tests that we did just in this week. We had a couple places where we said download the presentation. Now we're changing that on the fly to get the presentation. We'll happy to report back on how that works. We took a look at some of our touches. There was a couple subject lines from Flint's conversations this morning that we think could be better and didn't score very well in that tester, right? And we know that's hit or miss, but it doesn't hurt to test, right? I mean, you never know. You don't know what you don't know, and so we have a big testing culture, and we try to do that a lot.
Excellent. All right, well, if you have any questions for Byron, please raise your hand. We're going to have some mics going around. But why don't you give us your top takeaways for the audience, see what else they can learn from it.
Well, I think the first thing I'd offer is kind of the first and last bullet points there, is that it is a 3-legged stool. It's about the right content to the right person at the right time. And it's difficult to execute that in any long-term way without some level of automation. And so I am a huge proponent of those. I'm tool agnostic, but I think automation is certainly something that can help you make some huge strides in your organization. And the last point that I would jump to there is, the point is that I think one of the things that I get more animated about is when we wait to turn something on until we have the perfect piece of content. And we turn that on and we kind of get lackluster results. And it's like, why didn't we just start with the 80% good enough? Because it's this whole idea, if you have something that's, as long as it's spelled, as long as it doesn't have typos, and it has good grammar, and it supports the brand, what's the risk of turning it on? Just turn it on. See how the customers react to it. And now if you go to turn on the one that, go from like an 80% good to a 95% good thing, Well, now you can measure the difference. Now you can tell if the asset was worth it. What you might find out is that the 80% one has some staggering click-through rates, and you can go spend your time working on another asset, you know, that maybe that wasn't a priority for you.
You're bringing down the house, Byron.
That's fantastic. Look at that.
Excellent. Do we have?
They are excited about that.
It's the case study to end all case studies. Do we have any questions from the audience? So we have one right there in the middle. I think we're going to have a mic on over to you.
What about the creep factor? When a user is inputting their company name and it automatically populates, and then a couple of weeks later, you're showing that you already know their address. Do people drop off at that point because they're kind of freaked out about the technology?
No, we haven't seen that. I mean, I can tell you that our conversion rates on those forms are, in most cases, well north of 50%. And it's a choice. I think in that example that we had on the screen, it's going to say, we think you were at one of these 5 companies. And I think most people feel like the company they work for, especially if you told me, for example, I work at Ford.com. The fact that I would put up a list of, well, which Ford specifically do you work at, I think most people wouldn't be turned off on that. We haven't seen any fall off downstream in the program as a result of that. What we continue to see is people are more likely to fill out the forms because we're not asking for as much information later in the process.
I think we have one behind you there too, Joey.
What vendor are you using to do that back-end population for those forms?
We are using demand base.
Any other questions? Oh, we got one back there.
How long did it take you to set up the process? So from deciding that you needed to set up personas to actually releasing a campaign?
Gosh, it takes longer, but the gating on them really was the content. The actual structure about, we think we want to do these 4 touches or 5 touches, and we think we generally want to take people down this path. We largely arrived at those decisions within a month or so in terms of conceptually how we wanted to do it. The issue was we had all these holes, some early stage content holes that we knew we needed to fill before we turned it on to be sure we had the right program. And so adding those cycles in, it took several months more to get those pieces of content in place.
Excellent. If you have any other questions for Byron, you can go to marketingsherpa.com/signup or go to the app. He's going to be doing a roundtable this afternoon. I think Penny from the IHS team is also doing a roundtable. And just in general, as you're networking, look for Byron, look for Penny and Jim from IHS as well, and feel free to pepper them with your questions and ask more about this truly great Best in Show case study. So, congratulations again, Byron.
Thank you.